Hello everyone, this is Chris here with another edition of Logic Without Math. There are several informal fallacies in logic that may be considered abusive in nature. They commonly occur in political contexts where emotions can become heated. The important thing that the fallacies I will discuss have in common is that they divert attention away from the truth or falsity of the proposition in question, although they do so in different ways. In an adversarial context, it is natural to feel aggravation at someone who insults or threatens you, misrepresents your position, or creates irrelevant excuses for not accepting what you are trying to tell them. Such behavior diverts attention away from the truth of what you say. Thus, a question of respect and moral responsibility can be raised about some fallacies. I will discuss here what is logically wrong with committing fallacies that abuse or label the opponent, misrepresent his position, or trot out irrelevant excuses. Often these fallacies are created without intention and in a subtle way, so none of us are really immune. But awareness can make us more careful and hopefully more respectful of each other. If you know someone who often commits one of the 6 fallacies I will mention here, you can send a link with the timestamp from below. Where they are done with malicious intent, these fallacies become a toolkit of rhetoric. In previous centuries, we can easily imagine them being employed by religious zealots behind the Inquisition and witch hunts. Today, when deliberate, they are used extensively by a new inquisition of a woke left that acts as if it is evil to disagree with them. I will start by being mercifully short and explaining what is meant in logic by a fallacy and an argument. A fallacy can only exist where there is an argument. In logic, an argument consists in nothing else but someone giving a reason or reasons to believe a particular proposition. An argument is a statement of C because P, conclusion because premises, irrespective of whether any negative emotions are involved. In this case, the P represents the premise or premises that are the reasoning given to believe in the conclusion C. The question then arises of whether P, if true, indicates that the conclusion C is also true. A fallacy occurs when the reasons given, even if true, are insufficient to establish the truth of the conclusion. Another name for a fallacy is a non sequitur, where literally the conclusion does not follow from the premises. To give a blatant example of the first fallacy I will examine, if I were to say that God does not exist because William James believed in him and he needs to trim his beard, this constitutes an argument because I then gave reasons to believe God does not exist instead of just expressing that as an opinion. Now the question of fallacy occurs and depends upon whether James's belief and the opinion that his beard is ugly, if true, establishes the non-existence of God. Well, of course it does not. God could exist with James believing it and having an ugly beard, and the conclusion does not follow from the premises. A logically valid argument that responds to another person must be one that addresses the position that the other person advances. If instead the criticism is criticism of the person himself, it commits the fallacy of argumentum ad hominem, or argument at the man. This kind of attack can take more than one form. It could be just an insult, or it can be a more subtle attack based on character or a perceived vested interest. As such, ad hominem arguments can be classified as abusive or circumstantial. As for the cause of unintended instances, it is especially true in religion, politics, or economics that our opinions are felt as a part of who we are, and when someone attacks our opinions, we may feel like we are under attack and may create an emotional response. Let's say, for example, that someone opposes a universal basic income. and says that if it is adopted, a large number of workers will leave their jobs, causing an economic collapse. Now, this person may be a wealthy individual who fears a tax increase putting a cramp on his budget for luxuries. It is also possible, although unknown at this point, that he dislikes workers, especially low-wage workers, and adopts classist prejudices. Did he say that the working class is lazy? Well, not directly, but he seems to imply something logically consistent with it, whether by intention or not. So it is in some sense natural for a working class person to feel under attack. Nevertheless, to argue that he is mean-spirited and opposes basic income from a motive of hatred is to commit the abusive form of ad hominem. The circumstantial variety of this fallacy is committed if we assert that he is opposing basic income out of a desire to protect a vested interest. Either way, it is an attack on the man rather than an attack on the opinion that he expresses. These psychological statements about him may actually be true, but the point is, even if they are true, they do not address the truth or falsity of the opinion that he expresses. But then again, being the victim of any fallacy does not make someone right either. The thing to do is to replace bad arguments that attack the man with good arguments that attack his opinion. One could point out that pilot projects going back into the 1970s have shown that worker flight does not happen. We could further argue that better psychological assumptions may explain why it would not happen. Opponents of basic income overestimate our motivation towards sloth and underestimate our greed. If we were so highly lazy and so little greedy as opponents of basic income seem to imagine, we would already see people en masse looking to reduce the 5-day work week and work only as many hours as necessary to sustain existence with no entertainment, vacations, or beer in the fridge. So in summary, what makes the ad hominem a fallacy of diversion is its focusing of the attention on the individual stating a proposition, rather than on the proposition stated. However, if the original proposition was about the person himself, for instance, a claim that he is good-looking, or the best candidate for a job, then the diversion element is not there, and it would not necessarily be fallacious reasoning to question his claims, unless a different fallacy was committed. So now I present the first day and night definition of the fallacy of ad hominem. A related fallacy that can easily be confused with ad hominem occurs when the attack on the individual consists in him having some association or membership in some group, or an assumption that he accepts all of its ideas. It often takes the form of someone being assumed to be or accused of being a communist, fascist, white supremacist, or conspiracy theorist, based on some perceived similarity with a group. Sometimes the group may not even really exist. The perceived similarity then gets applied to other ideas or traits of that group that are not the topic of discussion, or which take the topic further, or in a direction that the other person does not intend to imply. Even where such membership may actually exist, such as when someone joins a political party or accepts some label, it is still true that individuals might not accept all opinions of that group, or have a more nuanced position. Any person can, in that case, be asked if he also accepts some other position of that group. It is nevertheless often a convenient intellectual shortcut to go from that similarity to that group that you consider to be wrong in some way, to him being an exponent of all that group's beliefs and desires. It is tempting to think you see where the opponent is going by attacking that position before he gets there, by means of that association with that group. It saves time. And let's face it, Some people make us want to save time because they won't just get to the point. But an argument that does this commits the fallacy of guilt by association. Like ad hominem, it diverts attention away from the truth or falsity of the proposition in question, and goes instead to a criticism of the group and the perceived similarity of the opponent with it. It is fallacious reasoning where that similarity does not exist, or it is not sufficiently relevant such that a criticism of the group becomes also a criticism of the proposition in question. It often takes the form of ascribing other positions of the group or character trait to the individual that he does not hold. And it then creates a false impression that a refutation of the proposition in question had occurred. So far we have dealt with claims that another person is bad, protecting a vested interest, or having some similarity with other persons. Another related fallacy occurs when we misrepresent the other person by attributing to him a position that he does not hold or profess. In political or emotional situations, this can be especially easy to do unintentionally, where what a speaker says may be similar to something that we strongly oppose. Like guilt by association, a misrepresentation can be made easily by assuming that the speaker is going somewhere and wanting to attack at that place. When this is the cause, it often takes the form of attacking an extreme position that the speaker may actually not hold. An example would be when someone is accused of wanting communism, when someone proposes something on the economic left that is not communism. An American suggesting that the United States should adopt a single-payer healthcare system like that of Canada may face retorts that his ideas did not work in the Soviet Union, or that he should not want governments manufacturing soap. But Canadian businesses are privately owned, just like in the United States. When someone attacks a proposition other than the one the opponent advances, the fallacy of the straw man is being committed. Its negative effect, especially on third parties, is to create a false impression that a person has been refuted as to what he actually did say, when in reality the proposition in question was never addressed. When done intentionally, it serves the purpose of preventing a real debate about the truth or falsity of what a person actually believes, causing third parties to stop listening to him. But should we not attribute beliefs to someone without him saying them? For instance, because he's far right or far left? Here is why not. Let's say that Smith believes 4 propositions, A, B, C, and D. And Jones replies with, no, not C. We can't really infer that Jones believes not A because he might be thinking C is not consistent with A. And Smith creates the straw man fallacy if he claims that Jones asserts not A and argues A as a means of getting people to accept C. The political problem and element of witch hunting is people thinking in all-embracing terms of right and left rather than right and wrong. It creates a sense of entitlement to have combinations of opinions go unquestioned, and attack anyone who deviates from any one of those opinions as one of those people. There is one situation in which we may be justified in attributing some assumption to the opponent that he may deny having, and that is where he is applying an unstated presumption, possibly without being aware of it. For an example, let's say that our opponent of basic income, who says workers will leave their jobs and ruin the economy, denies believing that workers are motivated by sloth rather than greed. The way to respond to this situation would be to argue that what he does say depends upon the truth of what he did not say as an unstated premise. We will not accept his conclusion until he provides evidence for that other proposition, that we say needs to be true first. Now we have switched to accusing the opponent of having an unstated false premise, or being inconsistent. The opponent can then respond if he has any evidence that we are mistaken about this. If we make this accusation in such a manner as to suggest it may be unintentional, then we are following a principle of charity, by which we assume he is intelligent with good intentions, but may be mistaken about something. But rather than justifying a straw man fallacy, or providing a counterexample to it being fallacious reasoning, this strategy actually works around it and turns it into something different. So in summary, the straw man is a diversion because it diverts attention away from the proposition in question to a different proposition. It is a fallacy because a refutation of one proposition does not necessarily address the truth or falsity of a different one. Imagine now that someone proposing a basic income gets responses that, even though it would eliminate poverty, some right-wingers like Milton Friedman supported it. And people who support it do not agree on whether a check should be also issued to the richest man in the country. These facts are true, but the problem is that they don't provide any evidence against having a basic income of some kind. As a result, pointing out these facts changes the subject and diverts attention away from the issue at question, even when those facts are true. When the reply that is produced is irrelevant, or cannot provide evidence against the truth of the original proposition, one commits the fallacy of the red herring. The effect diverts attention away from the original proposition in question. The strange name of this fallacy comes from the idea that dogs on a fox hunt can be drawn off the trail by the stronger smell of fresh salted herrings that are placed to steer them off the track. This name is itself an analogy of what we may strategically do when faced with something difficult to dispute. The temptation is to go on the offensive with sentences we might start with a yeah but that may seem similar enough to the original proposition to be relevant to it. The point is to find and state a true fact that will just get people to stop proposing the idea that we don't like. If it is not a red herring, we can and arguably should relate it to the original proposition and explain how it is evidence against its truth. Where we cannot do so, a strong temptation may lead us to want to play a game of whack-a-mole with a bunch of red herrings, going on with a yeah but this, yeah but that, yeah but the other thing. Where it is done without intention, we may see sometimes in a political context a less obvious changing of the subject that may make a true but irrelevant point. In this example, I will show an irrelevant difference from the original proposal, which is an irrelevant claim of difference of the situation. When the American politician Bernie Sanders was proposing free university tuition, as is done in Denmark, he received a response that Denmark has a population of only 5 million. The intention may have been to point out a fact that by comparison, the U.S. providing free tuition to a larger number of citizens would cost more money. Sanders did not think of it, but Denmark also only has 5 million taxpayers to finance the higher education. Therefore, the higher population in the U.S. is not relevant to the issue of whether it should provide free tuition and is a red herring. And here is where a red herring is really powerful. Given a fact he knew to be true, Sanders was dumbfounded, as most of us would be. And the good advice when you have a sense that a reply should not have been trotted out because you are still in the right is to suspect a red herring. Ask how it supposedly refutes what you were saying before. Now I will go into a couple of fallacies that are more attempts at intimidation than just diversion. When arguing with someone who holds an unpopular opinion, it may be tempting to point it out that such an opinion is not popular. Of course, few people ever will explicitly argue that an opinion is popular, therefore must be true, or that it is not popular and therefore must be false. This often occurs between the lines. We see it often in advertising, where we are told that this or that brand of pickup truck is the best selling, and we are left to draw the inference ourselves that said brand is better in some sense because, well, most people seem to believe it. It may often take the form of saying that an idea is outdated instead. We somehow should have gone beyond it in the current year. Arguing for the positive, that an idea is true, one might say that, well, everyone knows it. Either way, the truth or falsity of a proposition is independent of the number of people who believe it. And an argument that a proposition is true because popular, or false because unpopular, commits the fallacy of argumentum ad populum, or commonly called an appeal to the bandwagon. The reason why it is not even reasonable to argue in this way is because most people do not determine their opinions as the end product of a chain of reasoning and fact-finding. They often believe what they're told, seeking to believe as others do, and as such, a consensus gets manufactured. This might seem reasonable in the sciences to appeal to the authority of their consensus. But even there, where academic freedom and total dispassionate commitment to the evidence may occur, scientists will themselves say that their conclusions are still somewhat provisional, based on new evidence that might come in. But today, with the decline in academic freedom that we see, the more rational approach is increasingly to be skeptical even of them. I may discuss appealing to authorities in some other video, but for now it is fallacious reasoning to appeal to the popularity of opinion of non-scientists, which includes especially journalists and politicians. Finally, when all else fails, someone faced with a proposition he cannot dispute may simply try to threaten the other person. Many people who do this simply don't realize that it may be ineffective in terms of getting you to change your belief, even if it might get you to censor yourself in some situations. I am here reminded of the famous quote from Dale Carnegie that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Of course, it would be rare to hear someone threaten you with violence, but it may come in the form of suggesting negative consequences for making certain statements, effectively invoking an implication of might makes right. Today, it often takes the form of cancel culture, with threats of job losses or cancellation of professional credentials. But the phenomenon behind the fallacy is actually not new. In authoritarian countries, laws against certain beliefs may be codified into law with prescribed penalties. It may also take the form of state force being used to crush dissent or unofficial opinion, which is why Socrates was executed. This is where this fallacy is most obvious, but it has more subtle forms that need not involve the force of the state. Lobbyists may threaten politicians with a reduction in campaign donations or negative publicity for failure to cooperate. Corporations may also feel threatened by the media or prominent figures who can give them negative publicity, or by consumers who may boycott them. On an individual level, you might only face the threat of people not liking you. However, regardless of how real or serious the threats may or may not be, the truth or falsity of any particular proposition remains the same. Thus, anyone who states or implies that another person's belief is not true because communicating it may have negative consequences commits the fallacy of argumentum ad baculum, or appeal to force. So if you liked it, feel free to check out my other videos and send a link to all your friends. Thanks for watching.